Hi, welcome to Talk About the Passion. I'm your host, Christian Campagna, and I'm happy to have you here. We're about 5 episodes in after returning from a bit of a hiatus, and I have been enjoying putting these together. My guest today is Aesop Dekker. I've known of Aesop for a while now from the blog he used to write, Cosmic Hearse, and then his drumming with many bands like Hickey, Agalloch, Ludicra, Worm Ouroboros, and many more. A mutual friend, Jason Koken, who was the first person I ever recorded talking to for this podcast, actually, introduced me to Aesop at the record store he works at in Oakland, the excellent Econo Jam. I've been there twice now and walked out, significantly poor but happy and, with a lot of really good music. And I've, followed him on Instagram for the last year, over a year. He's been posting like a record a day with like a little blurb about it, and I always enjoy this kind of sharing of music and the discussion that usually ends up happening. There's no long-winded self-absorbed story about why this record rules, which has its place, but this is more just discussions about the music. On this conversation I had here, it was similar. A lot of times I have a list of bullet points I want to talk about with someone, but then sometimes conversation is just more natural, and that's kind of what we have here. A fun conversation between two music fans talking about him growing up in Florida, ending up in the Bay Area, and how his band Hickey, initially Fuckboys, were received in the scene there. Having one band rejected by Alternative Tentacles, and then recording a record on Alternative Tentacles with a different band a few years later. Aesop has great taste in music, and he's very knowledgeable about a lot of stuff, which is why this was an easy conversation and one I really enjoyed having. This is a long episode, so I'll stop talking here and we can just get on with this. Before that, though, if you like what you hear, please consider subscribing to the podcast wherever you listen to podcasts. I try to get one out every Tuesday morning. So far, so good. I'm also on social media. Just look up Talk About the Passion podcast on Instagram, or my personal Instagram, which I'm more active on, actually, Caffeine and Cookies. All one word. Okay, well, thank you for listening, and here we go with my conversation with Aesop Dekker. All right, so I am here this evening with Aesop Dekker. Thanks for coming on.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
I asked you a couple of years ago when I met you for the first time at Econo Jam in Oakland, and I'm finally getting around to it now. So, yeah, and I just saw you a couple of weeks ago and got some good records. It's for people out there that if you're ever in the Bay Area, definitely hit up that shop and. There's good stuff in there. I was psyched. So you are on. So we're friends on Instagram,
Yep.
and over the last year, I guess a little over a year now, you've been putting up these record of the day little
Yeah.
reviews, which it's been really cool, and it kind of reminds me of is that sort of itching, that Cosmic Hearse itch with just discussing music.
Yeah, I guess I kind of remembered like that I don't really like writing about music
Yeah,
much. Like I like talking about records with my friends and whatnot, but I don't really like writing about sound is really difficult.
yeah. Hmm.
Um, and like but I just kind of with the podcast, I mean not the podcast, the blog, I think I put a little more into it. Like
Yeah.
these are really just like blurted out kind
Yeah.
of thing
Yeah.
over a cup of coffee in the morning. And
Yeah. It's good, like
I put the
discussion
record
fodder,
on. Yeah, I put the record on. I kind of skim through it,
Yeah.
and yeah, so it is sort of the same thing because it just kind of does speak to my love of like talking about records with
Yeah.
folks. Still that I'll never tire of that.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's, I worked in some used record stores for many years, and that was one of my favorite things. And in your shop, there's a lot of, I think I bought three records that had your little Aesop recommends stickers on them. So that's always cool to go into shops because I think like in the 90s, there was a stigma attached to record store employees that we were, snotty or whatever because, they would maybe come in and, we're listening to jazz or something. So they think that you're, I've had guys I've met years later that, used to come into a store I worked at in Massachusetts and I always thought you were kind of a dick. Like I don't judge people. So I don't do that. So it's,
Yeah, I mean that's kind of one of the mission statements around the store a little bit is to kind of not do that. Like
yeah.
I don't, like I've definitely felt that way like going to like, I grew up uh like reading comics
Hmm.
and you comic book stores and you would always like kind of take a beating from some guy for having, so-called shitty taste or
Yeah.
whatever.
Yeah. Right.
That Simpsons archetype
Right.
is real in that record store. There's that fucking movie where Jack Black plays that
Oh
guy.
yeah. Yeah.
So we, like we've kind of have a conscious, like I don't get it because it's like, if you want, record stores, that's a tough sell anyways.
Yeah.
You're not making a lot of money,
Right.
so it's like you want it to be inviting and you don't want to alienate people and you want people to stay interested in records.
Yeah.
You don't want to gatekeep
Yeah.
records. It's
Right.
just,
Yeah. Who wants
you
to do
know,
that?
plus it's a weird flex to just be like,
Yeah.
I listen to records, like I'm somehow better than
Right.
anyone.
Right. Yeah. I know. I always said that. Like, some people are just born at different times and they, missed out on this. And it's who cares? Like if that
Yeah.
kid is discovering this through discovered Fang through Nirvana, that's cool. Like,
Yeah. I mean, I don't know. I mean, there's lots of music I find repulsive,
yeah.
you know, but I just as I get older, I guess I kind of rounded it. Like I was really militant when I was a
Yeah.
kid
Oh, yeah.
about
Same here.
I was really fond of telling you that everything you listen to is garbage and
Yeah.
everything I listen to is great and
Yeah.
smart.
Yeah.
But I also, as I got older, I kind of just was like, oh, like, nobody's trying to sell me shit anymore.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like blur pills and I don't know, like prescription drugs. Like,
Yeah.
I'm not the target market for
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
most things that
Exactly.
come out. So I listen to it and I have to kind of stop and go, do I honestly dislike this or is this just like, is it going over my head? Is it not do I not understand it? Like, I don't know, taste is a really tricky thing. And
Yeah.
I spend a
For
lot of
sure.
time thinking about it,
Yeah.
you know. But yeah, people come in and they buy fucking things that I'm just appalled by, but
Yeah.
I'm not going to tell them.
Yeah. I know. Yeah, I was one of those in the 90s. I found a picture of myself a while back at Disneyland and I'm wearing a Charles Mingus shirt. And I'm just like, that guy at fucking Disney with the Charles Mingus shirt. Like, check me out. Fucking,
I would flip you more shit for being at Disney World than,
yeah, that's true.
you know.
Yeah. Yeah.
But yeah, fuck, dude. I don't own a Mingus shirt, but I certainly own like a fucking Lee Morgan shirt and like three shirts with Alice Coltrane on them. And
Oh, yeah.
I don't know. It's just yeah, I'm fucking an old guy that works at a record store. I am a fucking stereotype.
But there's and you're not like a guilty pleasure person, which, I saw you posted Steely Dan at one point, and people, show up in the comments and they're just, I get friends that are very angry that I love Steely Dan.
Yeah, well, I think it's a thing. Like, I bet you that a lot of the people that are angry about Steely Dan, because I used to be, and then one day they're just going to hear it and
Yeah.
it might click. That's happened with a couple of things. I'm fascinated by that too, like things that were fucking horrifying to me when I was a teenager that
Yeah.
now, no, like
Just,
the shape of my brain changed? Did I have to hear, like, was there a requisite amount of like
right.
things I had to hear to prepare me for
Yeah.
that?
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
don't
Right.
know,
I know.
but Steely Dan is I'm more embarrassed that I like Earth Crisis. I'm honestly, I think that was the one thing that I was a little bit when I was doing those posts. I was like, man. I
Yeah.
can't believe that I fucking love Breed the Killers by Earth. Right?
Yeah. Well,
Got riffs.
yeah, there's
Got
riffs
heavy
there. Yeah,
riffs.
for
Yeah.
sure.
Yeah.
Um, and then you also posted, and I was pretty psyched. You posted that second JFA album, which I love that
Yeah.
record. And I went back and I was like, I feel like you wrote about that on the Cosmic Curse. So I went back and looked,
I
and
think I just cut and
yeah,
pasted
yeah,
into
and there was one on there, and but in the comments of it, some guy made a comment about. He said the intro part to "I Like Girls," and I was like, "Is that really what you remember the name of that song as, buddy?" Because that's that song "I Love Broads," and I was
I
like,
love broads. Yeah.
is he just trying to be a PC or?
I don't know, you know. I
But that's a
mean
great record.
that's a great I thought they were great. Like, I mean, that speaks to that thing. Like, I remember I was a really big fan of that band because, and this is not like a flex, but I got into hardcore. I was like 12.
Yeah,
So like there was, by the time I was like 14 or 15, like I was a little bit like, okay, like that's cool. Like it was
right.
a little stagnant.
Hmm.
And JFA was one of those bands. There was a few, like I really like JFA and Naked Ray Gun,
Oh yeah,
Reason that were like, doing a little more. I think they were like, like I said in the post, I think that those guys they just become too good to play just
yeah,
hard.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Of
And
course.
like bands had that conundrum, like, what do we do? Like, we're getting older and we're actually getting better at our instruments and we're discovering interesting music. And I
Yeah,
just think they did it with real, like, it didn't seem, I don't know, it didn't seem like some other bands like Die Kreuzen's like forays into like alterno rock or
yeah, yeah. Hmm.
it felt real like natural.
Yeah, yeah,
I fucking hated the My Movie EP when it came out and just re-listened to it like a couple months ago and was like, fuck, man,
yeah,
what a
yeah,
cool record. Like everything they did was really great.
yeah. I need to check out that last, not the last one, but because they've put out some more recent ones. But that I think it's like a white cover
Was
that came
that
out.
Nowhere Blossoms?
Yeah, Nowhere Blight. Yeah, was
Pretty
that good?
good.
Yeah, I need to check that
Yeah.
out
I
again. I haven't.
mean, there's some cringy moments.
Yeah, yeah,
It's pretty good. I remember really liking it when it came out.
yeah.
So
You came up also as an idea for this podcast, which maybe we can talk about this in the future. Is a buddy and I were talking about doing episodes of this podcast and talking about when bands took like a turn, like Discharge, Grave New Worlds,
oh
Earth,
yeah.
Earth AD, 7 Seconds, SSD, all those kind of.
Another
Um,
favorite topic of
yeah,
mine.
yeah, because you would post about Grave New World, and I'm a fan of that record. I just I love Discharge, but I also love that record. And it's a it's hard to argue with some people on it. They just refuse.
Well, that record, the hatred for that record, I think, speaks more to like just narrow-mindedness of like their audience rather than what the band is doing. And I guess
Yeah,
whenever bands do this sort of thing, I always have to ask myself, was it like, like with the JFA thing, did they make the record they wanted to make? Like,
yeah,
did they believe in this record?
yeah,
The vocals are a little bit, by the end of it, you're a little bit like, all right, but the riffs
hmm,
are solid.
yeah,
It's a great, it's a great record. I think, but there are a lot of those, you know, what do you do, right? Like
yeah, yeah.
you know,
You want to do something a little different, and
yeah, you can't just play hardcore. It doesn't have the staying power. Like
yeah,
and it was so rigid in its fucking rules for
yeah,
all the like, open-mindedness of it. Like I picked up on that real quick. Like I
yeah,
remember if you like if there was a band that like palm muted a guitar part,
yeah,
they went metal.
yeah, yeah, exactly, yeah, yeah,
Or if like you played like a 6/8 groove, like, it's all over, like
yeah.
a example would be DRI's like I don't need society, like the
Oh
verse of
yeah,
that.
yeah, yeah,
Like doing that, you were, oh, you're metal. If you had a guitar,
Yeah,
oh, you're metal. If you had long hair, oh, you're metal. And it was like, and by the time I was like 15, I was just like, yeah, I don't fucking care,
yeah. I
I
was
like
psyched.
wearing,
Yeah,
yeah. So,
yeah. Because I think like a lot of us started as a metal kid, and then kind of put it aside for a while. But then like Animosity comes out by COC, and I'm like, oh, you can. And there was a guy in Boston named Mark Johnson who was in a metal band called Executioner, who weren't very good. They had a record on New
they,
Renaissance.
they were anal cunt related.
Yes, yeah. Seth played with them briefly. Yeah,
Like, what
uh,
don't I know? Because I know that. How
that's
to
pretty
drive a
awesome.
car. Yeah.
But they had a record in the name of metal, and I was good friends with that guy Mark, who was he's actually Mark was a teacher who teached at the same school with Nancy Baril. But this is a side note. But anyway, he put on a lot of shows in Cambridge at Hannam Hall, where there's a famous Sam Hain and Kill Slug played there. But he booked Fang there. But he would always put his band on. So, it would be like Scream and Executioner. And they'd have smoke machines. There was a famous show they had with Corrosion of Conformity around Animosity where the smoke machine set the fire alarms off in this church and the fire department had to come. But that was, I don't know, for me, that was an exciting time when the metal and hardcore was sort of coming together.
Yeah. I mean, I grew up in Florida and that band for us was Nasty Savage.
Yeah, yeah. Ronnie
Like,
Savage.
yeah, there would be
Or
a lot of
Nasty Ronnie. Yeah.
Nasty Ronnie, yeah, and they would be on sometimes on occasional weird bills. Like I wasn't actively going to metal shows
Yeah.
like when I was 15 or 16, but still saw Nasty Savage a couple times, saw Savatage a few times.
Oh, yeah. Savage.
I, I saw Atheist once
Mm-hmm.
point, and I don't know, like I think it was probably like, it was always like, oh, the mentors when the mentors or Dr. No or somebody like that would come to town, throw fucking Nasty Savage on
Yeah.
it. And I came to really love them,
Yeah.
kind of ironically, like I was definitely like, these guys are goofy as shit. And then
Right, right.
you get the tape and you're like, wow, these fucking got riffs,
Yeah, yeah.
got riffs.
That's all
So
that mattered. It still does for a lot of these bands. If you have
I don't know.
riffs.
I was snooty. Like I didn't like when I was a teenager, and I was a little bit like closeted about it. Like I think it was like, I kind of came by metal or by punk kind of more the back end, like through new wave. Like I loved the Police,
Oh, yeah.
Cars,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
I was before that I was like listening to AC/DC and
Yeah.
Kiss and Zeppelin with like the stoner kids in my
Yeah.
neighborhood,
Yeah.
and they graduated to like Iron Maiden and Judas Priest, and I
Yeah.
had an appreciation for that,
Yeah.
but I really loved the fucking Police
Yeah. Yeah.
and those first like three Police records,
Yeah.
and an older kid in my neighborhood then was like, oh, if you like the Police, you'll like the Clash,
Right.
might like the Damned, and you
Yeah.
might. And that's kind of how it was. And then once I was into hardcore, I was like, yeah, I also still hung out with the stoner kids and listened to
Right.
a lot of Judas Priest and Maiden and got hip to Metallica, saw Metallica
Yeah.
open for Ozzy,
Yeah.
and it was like, I just kind of still identified as like a punker kid,
Yeah. Yeah.
you know, and
Is
was
that
like,
around?
and also like, even if I was interested in metal and like, wanted to play. I thought I couldn't play in a metal band because I felt like I didn't have the chops.
Right.
I felt like you had to be a really skilled musician to play metal.
Yeah.
It turns out that's not true.
Right.
You know? But like I kind of avoided it for many years because I was like, oh, I just don't have the chops for that.
Right. Right. So where in Florida did you grow up?
I grew up in a place called Hollywood, which is like right between Fort Lauderdale and Miami,
Okay.
you know, south.
And how does music find you there as a kid?
Like, what do you mean?
Like, were your parents musical, or were they into
No,
music?
they didn't play instruments, but my mom had like, they were boomer hippies. She had
Yeah.
a large record collection. So
Yeah.
for as a little kid, it was like, listening to the Beatles and the Rolling Stones, that she would have these records. And, I would gravitate towards like
Yeah.
heavier Beatles songs or the heavier Rolling Stones songs. I kind of liked
Yeah.
sinister sounding music. And,
Yeah.
my mom knew I loved records, and I got a record player when I was probably 6. And
Yeah.
then I go to the fucking department store and
Yeah.
Kiss and AC/DC records,
Yeah.
and that kind of set me on. Like, I didn't think of it as record collecting. I
Yeah.
was
Yeah. Yeah. You're
Evan
just buying
had a
stuff.
few records,
Yeah. Yeah.
and I just was thinking about this because the writing about Kiss, it was like this very myopic thing. Like, I kind of believed at that age that, like, I was very loyal to
Yeah.
band. Like,
Oh
Kiss
yeah.
was the band.
Yeah. Yeah.
We were the band right up until I heard fucking Highway to Hell on the radio.
Yeah. Then moved on to that. Yeah.
Oh man, like that Kiss shit sounds kind of weak next to
Yeah.
this. Like they're literally driving to hell.
Yeah.
Like, this is I want in on that.
Yeah.
And then, it was Kiss right up until I heard Black Sabbath's Paranoid.
Yeah.
And then I was like, oh fuck, AC/DC has no. And, it was also like, oh, this is like they're singing about, drinking and having sex,
You're right.
like things I wasn't doing at that
I know, right?
time. Like,
Yeah.
so,
I know.
I didn't relate. Sabbath, like I was into D&D, so
Yeah.
Sabbath with that, and,
Yeah.
so it just kind of went that way. And then it was, yeah, then I started to discover things like the Police and the Cars,
Yeah.
you know, and then it was punk, then it was hardcore, then it was thrash, then it was death metal and grindcore and
Yeah.
metal, and so on and so forth. And I still get excited about like movements in music,
Yeah. 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 And that's the stuff when you start sort of relating to stuff, is at least for me, was when I found, like, punk and hardcore, and even some of the more, like, all that, like the Cars and stuff, and even though it was like essentially love songs, they were just, the way they were worded was much different than the Beatles and that kind of thing. So it was much more interesting.
Yeah, I guess I don't, I thought that I mean it was with that first Police album. I mean, those guitars are like, it's real guitar oriented.
Yeah.
It's not like their 80s, like, heavy synth output. It's just really driving guitar.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that like primed me to listen to like the Ramones.
Yeah. Yeah.
And like I said, there was the guy I was in my very first punk band with was an older dude in my neighborhood who I think just was like, he was like the fucking disciple, he was like, I need to get more people into punk. And I was like, oh, this kid likes the Police, and
Yeah.
he might be ripe to. And he lent me like, the Ramones, Road to Ruin, and there was like a Best of the Damned, like the
Yeah.
first, and a Sham 69 record.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, well, fuck, man, fuck the Police, NWA reference, and
Yeah.
then I heard fucking hardcore. I heard
Yeah.
Black Flag Damaged, and I was like, what the fuck? Like, this is. And then I remember like literally asking the person who first played me Black Flag Damaged, like, is there more
Yeah.
records? This?
Yeah.
And yes, there is. The second, one of the earliest punk, my memories of buying a punk record was I bought the Freeze Guilty Face 7-inch.
Oh, wow. In
Yeah,
Florida? Down in
I
Florida?
did. Yeah,
Yeah.
like off of a older kid at my high school. When I was like in the ninth grade, he was like an older kid who was into punk, but he was like over punk, and he
Yeah.
was fully committed to like hair metal.
Oh, yeah.
Wanted to sell all his punk
Oh,
records and
nice.
had a box. And I think I just bought it because it had skulls on the front,
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
song about a fucking Halloween, and it
Yeah.
had
Yeah. Instead of
horror.
broken bones on it too, I think.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Like, I
Yeah.
think it's a picture from like, Cambodia,
Yeah.
like,
Yeah. Yeah.
and like I went, oh, this is gonna go really fucking hard, and it did, and
Yeah. Yeah.
still like it's probably my most reached for 7-inch. I
Yeah.
was
That's a great 7-inch. Those guys are an underrated when you talk about Boston, hardcore. and you've, Boston purist people would be, they're not from Boston, they were from the Cape, but they're
Right.
from Boston. I mean, they fucking wrote the song, Boston, not LA.
Well,
Um,
they also, they weren't like they clearly were. Well, they're like a little bit earlier than I think a lot of
yeah,
those bands,
yeah,
and they also like weren't doing. They had nothing really in common with like SSD or
yeah,
DYS. They were like kind of like older dudes and
yeah, yeah,
leather jacket, kind of like, But fuck, dude, like Land of the Lost is great.
yeah,
Fucking
yeah.
Avid
That
Reaction,
reaction's good. Yeah,
like I just, yeah, been a
yeah,
fan of the Freeze like from the go.
yeah, yeah. And they still play here and there, I guess, when Cliff can get it together. I
Yeah, I have a
think.
friend who lives up in Vancouver who I think played bass for them on a tour.
Oh, all
And
right. Yeah,
yeah,
I think,
I've
and I
never
think,
seen them. They never came to Florida. Like of all,
yeah,
we did get a lot of bands coming from down the coast, and
right.
we had a pretty good, in the mid 80s, there was a guy, Richard Shelter in Miami, who was doing a really great job of like bringing national touring acts to get him. You'd have to
Yeah,
talk him into it,
yeah,
you know, because it's a whole extra day, and all that's going to happen is like you're going to get the shit beat out of you by skinheads, and it's going to be really hot, and your van's going to break down, and
yeah.
you know,
That was
every
the what you heard, you know.
right. Yeah, I was going to say every band, like fucking like in Henry Rollins' book, he talks about how much he fucking hated going there,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
and they still did it. And, that a
yeah,
lot of that is because of this one guy, Richard Shelter,
yeah,
who, I tormented when I was a kid. And I recently like wrote him a long letter of apology.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Nice.
Thank you so much, man. And I'm sorry I was such a dick when I was 14 years old.
Nice.
I was like up his ass about, what do you mean the show is $5? What do you mean I can't come into this bar? What do you mean
Yeah,
like my band can't open for this band?
yeah.
Really, and I think I'm sure I wasn't the only fucking shitty like suburban kid that was doing that
Fucking
to him.
with them. Yeah.
Hated
Uh,
it. I think we even like one of my earliest bands like even had a song about fuck him.
I feel like every scene had sort of one of those guys that was. We had Mike Gitter up here. Was a
Right,
Boston
yeah,
guy.
who great guy.
Yeah,
You
yeah,
know,
he's awesome. Yeah, he's a good dude. Yeah,
and you're like you grow up and you're like, fuck, I was just such an entitled prick. Like I just, I believed that I was owed punk shows,
yeah, yeah. I
and
was
they got
always fine with him, but people used to give him shit all the time, and just I don't know. He brought all these fucking amazing shows to Boston, and he was a good dude. I liked
yeah.
him. I went to my first show with him in Al Quint, which was Channel 3 in Kraut in
Oh shit.
January of '84, and yeah,
I was a little nervous because I think Crowd is coming up on the whole record of the day thing, and
oh yeah,
I've definitely talked some shit about them in the past, and like
yeah,
then I guess their official Instagram or something started following me, and I'm
uh
like,
oh,
because they were like one of those bands that we loved when we were kids, but we
yeah,
like openly talk about how we fucking hated them, and then listen to their record when
right,
they
right, yeah,
just hated them because they were like handsome dudes and on MTV, and they were the first punk band to have a video on
yeah,
MTV, and we were just like, oh, fucking Kraut, man, blah, blah, blah. And then we would just be home in our rooms, like listening to Adjustment to Society,
yeah,
because
yeah,
it's a fucking killer record.
yeah. And as far as going to lives, what was your first live for like a big show?
Like a big, like arena rock type
Yeah,
show.
yeah.
It was probably the fucking Police. I
Yeah.
think it was Police and the Fix at the
Oh,
Miami
nice.
Football Stadium.
Yeah.
And then then I was into punk. So I didn't
Yeah.
go to, I mean, I went to some, it would always be like tagging along with neighborhood kids and seeing
Yeah.
like, Judas Priest. I saw Iron Maiden every time they would come through because
Yeah.
fuck you. I like Iron Maiden. I don't care if they're,
Yeah. Yeah.
I took a beating for it. Like people would be like, "Oh, it's all fantasy rock." I'm like, I don't care. They're the greatest
Yeah.
band.
Exactly.
You'll fucking see them. And went to a lot of like arena rock shows like that at this place called the Hollywood Sportatorium.
Yeah.
But mostly, just going to punk shows. And the very first like touring punk band I ever saw was the Necros.
Oh, wow.
And they were playing like there was just these, one of these like fucked up apartment buildings where they probably have them everywhere, but they're all over Florida where it's just like three sides around a gross, disgusting swimming pool that's
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
covered in algae and there's beer cans and
Yeah.
fucking lawn
Yep.
furniture floating in it. And they were having punk shows. It was called the Whitney,
Oh,
and
wow.
the Necros ended up. I feel like they had a show somewhere else, and at last minute got moved.
Right.
And years later, I got into a fucking online beef with Barry Hensler
Oh, yeah.
because he was talking just shit about that show and about the
Right.
other bands that played. And I think I fucking wrote him and I said, yeah, that was like the first punk show I ever went to. And it was really meaningful to me. It was a really like a turning point in my fucking development. And he was just a crabby, hemorrhoidal fucking
Uh,
asshole, like wouldn't relent and just talked about how
that sucks.
Florida never produced any good punk bands and it was a waste of time fucking playing there, and whatever. It's like, you
Yeah.
know, they I don't know.
Yeah.
I
You
wouldn't
talk,
get no, I wouldn't get in an argument with him, but it was just like, dude, it wasn't a total waste. Like,
right.
you fucked some kids up. That was cool. But he
Yeah.
didn't like, I don't know, like why you're still mad about this fucking show you played in 1980.
40 years ago. Right.
And
Yeah.
you're that's still fucking grinding your gears, Barry.
Yeah. That's weird.
Yeah.
You talked about speaking of Florida bands, Broken Talent.
Broken Talent,
Yeah.
yeah.
So what was that band about?
They were like, so I always kind of describe it like in South Florida. I grew up between Fort Lauderdale and Miami, like I said, and like there was two, like Fort Lauderdale, the scene was a little bit like, I mean, Fort Lauderdale was a little more rednecky.
Yeah.
And so if there were punk bands there, they were real kind of generic. They were always like the singer was like a guy with a mohawk,
Yeah.
and it was like every band sounded kind of like the Exploited.
Right.
But then Miami, I think, because of the university and like it's a big fucking city, like had kind of a little more art,
Yeah.
more like originality. And my favorite band from Miami was this band called Broken Talent, and they were like U of M guys,
Hmm.
and they had long hair and fucking beards. They were
Yeah.
real crazy. They kind of sounded like Flipper,
Oh, wow.
and like just like punks fucking hated them.
Yeah.
And then I remember like one of the first shows, or the first show that I ever played in any band, we asked them to come play. It was at our singer's house in Fort Lauderdale.
Yeah.
And they came and fucking played,
Yeah.
and we became really good friends with them. And, like Malcolm, their bass player, I'm still in touch with. He's in North Carolina now, but he's played in Anti-Scene for a while
Oh,
now,
wow.
the bass player of Anti-Scene. But he had a record store in
Hmm.
uh, Danbury, Connecticut for
Oh,
a while.
wow.
He ended up there.
Yeah.
But he was like a big mentor, he was a
Yeah.
guy that like I'd go to his house in Miami and he would like, oh, have you heard this record? Have you heard that record? He's the guy that turned me on to like Hellhammer
Oh,
was like
wow.
a record I remember him playing for me, and like, and Fang and a lot of just stuff that I might have otherwise missed.
Yeah.
And, you know, he was the guy, like there was one point, like I had kind of long hair back then because, there wasn't like a place you could go and get a mohawk,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
where you couldn't get punk shirts
Right.
anywhere. So like I think at that age, I didn't really look like a punk.
Yeah.
I got a mohawk, like somebody, came over and gave me a mohawk. And I remember Malcolm was like, man, like I sold out.
Yeah.
And I'll never forget it. He was just like, he said something about like I was conforming to the non-conformity.
Yeah.
I never forgot about that. You
Yeah.
know, that
That's
guy,
funny.
he stayed with me like 2 years ago. He was on his way to Mexico to go get some dental work done, and he crashed on my couch, and we sat in my living room right here and listened to records.
Nice.
But they were such a good band. They were fucking hated.
Yeah.
Uh,
Do they record anything?
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
they put out a 7 inch, and then they put out a lot of tapes. They had a label called
Yeah.
TPS, and they put out a bunch of comps, and now there's a like a retrospective discography LP that
Oh, wow.
I
All
wrote
right.
liner notes for it.
Oh, nice.
But they were just, an unsung band.
Yeah.
They, there was them, and there was another band called Morbid Opera, who were this all-female, like kind of garage rock band.
Hmm.
And they were also real instrumental in sort of just like, teaching me about, you know, how this works,
Yeah. Yeah.
and real nice to like a very overbearing, fucking obnoxious 13-year-old kid, you know?
Yeah.
So with lots of questions
Yeah. Yeah.
and
Eh,
opinions.
Yeah. And so when do you start playing drums?
Oh, like right away, like in 1984, I was asked to be the guy James, the guy who turned me on to punk.
Yeah.
Right away was like, I've got this band, which was him and a bass player,
Yeah.
and like you're gonna play drums. I think I tried out on bass first, and then I sucked at that, and then drums. It it was a little more natural because it was more visual. Like I
Yeah.
could
Yeah.
watch what people were doing.
Right.
I wasn't good, but like, in a matter of a month or something of doing it every day after school, I was like, well, I'm actually better than I was, so maybe I should keep doing it. You
Yeah.
know, it was just, it was not, I never had the idea of like, oh, I'm gonna play drums. I want to play drums. I think I
Yeah.
wanted to play guitar when I was like 10 and listening to
Right.
like DC
Yeah. Yeah.
lessons, but they weren't, I had no aptitude for it.
Right.
Like the guy who was my guitar teacher told my mom, he was like, your son is never gonna be able to do this. He's not, he's a drummer. And I think it was like an
Yeah.
insult, you know, but
Yeah.
I think he kicked something in my brain, like, yeah,
Yeah.
sure. He's saying that that's easier. Like,
Right.
I'll do that. I'll do the easy, I'll go the easy route and play drums, you know.
Which I don't think that's necessarily true. I mean,
Yeah, I don't know, but it's weird to me because, there was a good many years where it was like my fucking job and I made
yeah.
money and I had a career,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And like, I'm like, that's so weird. Like, I'm in fucking Poland or something playing
Right.
a and I at no point in my life ever went, I want to play drums.
Right. Right. You
You
just kind of did
know,
it.
I just kind of did it,
Yeah.
and I guess got good enough to go to Poland.
Yeah.
That's it.
That's when you know when you're in Poland.
Yeah,
Definitely.
you're in Poland, you're like, I think I've made something out of this. I've got something.
Uh, and when do you end up moving to San Francisco area?
1988 when I graduated high school and then I went to the Art Institute in San Francisco
Okay.
because, my family was basically like, you have to do something academic.
Yeah.
My aptitude was, punk and playing in bands and drawing flyers and making fanzines and pen paling with people. But I drew a lot. I drew a
Yeah.
lot of. So I went to the Art Institute for a couple of years and then was like, I don't want to have a career in art. I want
Yeah.
to continue, to play music and
Yeah.
just do that.
Right.
And that's what I did.
Yeah.
And I just stayed in the Bay Area. And I have ties here. Like I was actually born here. My father,
Oh,
after my
okay.
parents divorced, my father stayed here. So
Yeah.
until he died in 2004, he lived in Oakland.
Oh, okay.
So,
Yeah.
it was also a place I was really familiar with for coming out here in the summer to visit him and
Yeah.
fucking loved this place
Yeah.
from, never wanted to live anywhere else.
Yeah. Well, so we have sort of a similar situation because I was born here and we moved to Los Angeles. My parents split up, but my dad stayed in LA and he's been there since. And same thing, I would go there every year and visit him. And then, and same thing when I started getting into punk. We'd go to, I'd make him drive me down to Zed Records in Long Beach
Hey,
and buy, that's when I started discovering all that Mystic record stuff because that every once in a while you'd maybe see like an ill repute record out here, but You weren't seeing like a Scared Straight record or, you know, The Grim or those,
Right.
any of those
Yeah.
compilations. So, but yeah, same thing. I would come out here and that's, that's what I still do. I go there once a year. But I lived there as an adult too, but LA just, who the fuck wants to live in LA? You know?
Yeah. I mean, I don't know. And like coming to, I had a similar thing where it was like those trips, those summers that I would go to California and San Francisco. My dad lived in San Francisco then.
Yeah.
It was like, yeah, Subterranean had a record store
Hmm.
and, you know, there was Aquarius Records existed back then, and there was like Reckless and all these really great record stores in the Haight.
Yeah.
So yeah, just come home and I would have like records and t-shirts that
Yeah.
nobody else could fucking get,
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah.
And I remember there was a kid in my town, Kevin, who his parents divorced and his dad lived in fucking like I don't, Fullerton or
Yeah.
something like that. And he would come back and he would get to go to shows at like the Olympic Auditorium and
Oh,
he
wow.
he would have the flyers and the records and like he would be going to LA and I'd be like, find me this record. And he'd be
Yeah.
like, you got to get me this record.
Yeah.
And it was, I mean, we had good record stores in Florida, but I mean, like I would have to take like three buses
Right.
into one, There was a
Yeah.
couple really good small, there was a in Fort Lauderdale for a while had a really good punk specialty store where
Yeah.
like I, the guy was really focused on like anarcho and like import foreign punk records, English and Finnish and
Yeah.
Japanese records. Couldn't afford any of them,
Right. Right. Yeah.
but the dude would let us like skip school and tape the
Oh, that's
record,
awesome.
which
Nice.
is just, not a good business model, but
Right.
he let us do it.
Yeah.
And so then I could sit, I could listen to Gizem and,
Yeah.
and fucking Appendix and like, oh my God, there's hardcore in other countries too.
I
How
know,
fucking,
right?
how cool is that? Like that opens a whole new world.
Yeah. And then going from like the scene in Florida to San Francisco area, that must have been pretty different.
It
Right.
was, yeah, it was a little disappointing because out here, when I got here, I was still underage and there wasn't really, I think Gilman had just started, the farm had just closed,
Yeah.
So, I kind of had this idea, like coming here in the 80s, I did see shows.
Yeah.
I tried to go to Ruthie's, but I couldn't get in, but I saw some shows at the On Broadway, which
Yeah.
was the Met.
Yeah. Yeah.
But when I got here in 88, it was really like it was like an adult scene.
Yeah.
And all the punk bands I liked were gone. And a lot of the people that were in those bands were doing like, there was just a lot of trend hopping. Like there was
Yeah.
a big funk, like
Yep.
everyone wanted to be the Red Hot Chili Peppers.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then there was this, or before that, there was like this goofy kind of cowpunk.
Oh, yeah.
Then it was
Yeah.
the punk thing. Then everybody, and then all this, I watched all the same people want to be like grunge,
Yep. Yep.
and try their hands at grunge. And then I watched all those people try their hand at being fucking no effects,
Yeah.
and then I watched all those same people then just go back to playing thrash because
Yeah.
metal was cool again and
Yeah.
safe.
Yeah.
And there was a
That's
lot of that, and I
that's
didn't
here
really,
too, It's so weird. It's just like
yeah, and
everywhere. Those
I didn't
guys
make
that just
friends, I didn't make friends through punk out here. I made
yeah.
friends through the Art Institute. And then the three folks that I was playing, or the two or three folks that I was playing music with in Florida ended up out here too.
Yeah.
We just resumed our band and then found that like the other, that those scenes wanted nothing to fucking do with us.
Yeah. And that was
That
Hickey,
that was the fuck
the fuck
boys.
boys. Yeah.
We were called the fuck boys. We were 17, 18
Yeah.
years old. And, we didn't like, the older folks fucking despised us.
Yeah. That sounds like Tim Johannen's nightmare to
Yeah, yeah. I mean, that was the thing about Hickey, and it's amazing to me. I actually had a fucking weird conversation with Cedric Bixler of Mars Volta.
yeah.
Apparently he's a big Hickey fan.
Oh, wow.
And he wrote me out of the blue on Instagram and was like, I just watched this documentary about punk in the Bay Area in the 90s, and like there's no fucking mention of Hickey. And he's like outraged. He's like, oh, how the fuck does that happen? And I was like, we were fucking written out of it. We never
Yeah.
played Coleman Street. We never were written about in Maximum Rock and Roll,
Yeah.
and we just, there was no fucking support from anyone. And I think, looking back, like we were never pissed off about it. We just
Right.
went, okay, well, I guess we have to like carve out our own thing, and we did.
Yeah.
And people followed. Like, it was like we basically started saying, okay, well, we can't play these bars, the trendy bars on 11th Street or in the Mission.
Yeah.
So we started finding warehouses and just parks or wherever to fucking play and set up a show. And all the other bands that were having the same fucking issues as us that we hadn't met or whatever came out of the woodwork, and like we embraced them and we made our own
Right.
scene. And that just made the older fucking punkers like hate us fucking more.
Yeah, I bet.
You
Yeah.
know?
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's how we got written out. Like they purposely wrote around us
Yeah.
because, fuck Hickey, you
Yeah.
know.
Yeah. That's it's just like the whole elitist, like we were talking about earlier with the gatekeeping and just, keeping bands out of, certain scenes and that kind of thing is just it's pretty fucked up, but it's everywhere.
Yeah, like when Hickey was at our peak, I guess, and we were only a band for a few years, but like when we were at our peak, that was when Maximum Rock and Roll was weirdly like fascinated with like garage rock. Do you remember
Yeah.
that?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Like that. So, I feel like maybe they didn't have like this fucking hatred for us or
Right.
whatnot. They were just really focused on
Over
that,
it. Yeah.
but the Gilman Street thing, I remember I was at Gilman one night with Aesop, who are friends from Florida,
Yeah.
and they were playing there, and I went to go see them. And Gilman used to have the minutes. I don't know if they still do this. I've been to Gilman two times in the last 20 years.
Yeah.
But they used to have the minutes from their meetings in the lobby, and I
Yeah.
was bored and reading the minutes, and there was a whole fucking meeting item about whether or not to let Hickey play at Gilman,
Oh, Jesus.
and and ultimately deciding not to. And
Right.
I was just like, that's weird because we never tried.
Right.
We never like called anyone who was associated with Gilman and said, can you,
Right.
like maybe there was a band that asked if we could be on it, and that set that, but that conversation happened without our knowledge
Right. Right.
or our input,
Right.
you know, and I just really think that, we had that reputation like these guys are just bad, bad, bad drug people, and,
Right.
you know, some truth to that.
Yeah.
There was like at one point when we first started, Alternative Tentacles had a general manager named Greg Workman,
Okay.
and I worked for the company that made all their merch.
Oh, all right.
Gave Greg Workman like the first tape of Hickey, and he was like, "Oh, I love this. Like, I want to put this out on AT."
Yeah.
Biafra was like, "Oh, fuck no." And like Biafra ended up like actively getting us bumped. There was some show that was happening like the 25-year anniversary or something of punk.
Right.
We were asked to play it. It was like they were doing two nights at this venue, and one night was going to be all these old punk bands like The Victims and like fucking No Mercy, like all these like old San Francisco punk bands, The
Yeah.
Avengers.
Right.
And then the next night was supposed to be like the New Breed, and it was supposed to be like Hickey and Fuckface, and we got fucking bumped off of it because Biafra had something to do with the organizing, and he was just like, I fucking hate that band. I hate those kids,
Wow.
And years later, I was in a band that was signed to AT,
Yeah, I was gonna say, yeah.
and I thought it was really funny. And I told Biafra, I was like, I think it's weird that you passed on Hickey, but like you put out, I think like, some bands that wouldn't have existed if it wasn't for us, mainly the Fleshies.
Yeah,
Yeah.
the Fleshies. I don't know them.
Yeah. They were
Huh.
like, a great fucking band, but I just was
Yeah,
like, they were doing like Safe Hickey,
right.
So, and that shit, bring it full circle. That's like, that comes from what we learned from Broken Talent was
Yeah,
like, trying to make it in a punk scene is fucking foolish.
yeah,
Like
yeah,
it's not worth your fucking time.
yeah. I always said, making it in like hardcore is just putting a band together and, writing songs and doing it. And, that's making, I think that's success right there. And when I
Yeah,
was younger, and just, if you get shows and play shows, that's great. And if people like it, that's even better. But, at the base of it, success is, I think, just getting out there and doing it.
well, we were often real good at like, sabotaging anything like that. Like when we were kind of at the height of our popularity, we were doing a lot of shows at this kind of art space. And for the life of me, I don't know why. These were like older art people, but I think they just thought that, like, oh, these guys bring chaos. Like they're
Right.
situationist punk band, so we should welcome them. And we would, get 300, 400 people packed into their space.
Yeah.
And there was some time where, like, I forget the guy's name, but he was like the old kind of boomer art guy that ran the space. And he came up to me. I was at our merch table, and he was like, MTV is here. They're filming some fucking like an episode of The Real World or
Right.
something. They want to come in, and we were like, fuck no.
Yeah.
Like,
Right.
hell no, we don't want to. We're not Kraut. We don't, we don't
Right.
want to have fucking MTV, And
That's so
we had
weird.
friends that were just like, why would you like, that were hung up on this, like, that's how you're going to get a record deal.
Right.
But
That's
we know how to make records. We have a record out. It's over there. You should buy it.
and then years later you're in fucking Poland playing drums and
Yeah, because I sold out and I joined a big successful fucking band that had already made like critically acclaimed records
right.
and whatnot.
Yeah,
So
so you get into some metal bands um in San Francisco.
mhm.
Uh the first one, Ludicra?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And Ludicra started because me and my friend John,
Hmm.
who was in a really great guitar player, he was in a great band in DC called Malefice,
Okay.
a hardcore band. They put out a 7 inch. And he was also living in San Francisco, and we just started becoming friends. And we were the only two people that we knew in the late 90s that were listening to lots of like death metal and black metal and thrash.
Yeah.
There was like a handful of like punkers and people that were listening to that. So we just were like, fuck it, like let's start a band.
Yeah.
And initially it was just going to be the two of us, and we were just going to record something just using the two of us.
Right.
And we started booking metal shows,
Hmm.
and we ended up meeting people, and from there that band, became a full-fledged band
Yeah. Yeah.
and signed to AT at
Yeah.
one point.
Oh
So
yeah. 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 How did that come about?
at that point, the general manager was this guy, Dave Adelson, who was now runs the label 20 Buck Spin.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
He was like a metal guy, and when
Yeah.
he became the GM at AT. I love saying that, the GM at AT. He kind of, like the label was kind of in this weird place where they were putting out, Jello vanity projects and the
Yeah.
occasional reissue of something.
Right.
And Dave Adelson had this idea that he kind of wanted to like steer the ship back to what was happening with AT like in the fucking mid 90s,
Right.
with 10 years before at that point, with Zenigiva and Neurosis,
Hmm.
you and Amoebics and like the heavier,
Yeah.
and he convinced Biafra to come see us play at this tiny bar, this place called the Hemlock,
Okay.
which was, I mean, this place held the room you played in held 30 people,
Oh wow.
and he fucking braved it and came out and saw us play. And like before we even finished, he was like on stage, like waving papers at
Yeah.
us,
That's
and
awesome.
I mean, by and large, like we looked it over and we were like, this is a real fair deal.
Yeah.
Nobody, like, we had a really good local following and
Yeah.
reputation being a really like killer live band,
Yeah.
but nobody nobody bid. Like we had put
Right.
out first record and we had recorded a second record and we had sent it to all these metal labels,
Yeah.
We were either told, it's weird, it was like we were told we were too metal by a lot of labels, and we were told by a lot of labels that we were too punk, we were too fucking polished, we weren't polished enough.
Right.
Well, that was kind of the response, and Biafra didn't fucking care. He liked
Yeah.
it. He heard the
Right.
record, and then we proceeded to just sort of bicker about logistics and
Hmm.
how records get sold and distroed,
Yeah.
and I have infinite respect for Jello and love him and whatnot, but it was awkward.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. And then we were when we recorded our third record, we had no intentions of putting out another record on AT. It was kind of
Yeah.
like we'd go on tour and we'd people would pick up the record and they'd see that logo, which we were all like, holy shit, like 14-year-old me to like have played on a record that has the fucking bat on
Yeah.
it.
I know.
I mean, like Jesus fucking Christ, right? But
Yeah.
it was disappointing because people would come to our shows and be like, "You guys are on AT?"
Yeah.
You know? And like ads would come out and they'd have the records that they put out in the past and the records that they're about to put out and no mention of us. Like we were just kind of like treated a little, the analogy I used was we were treated a little bit like we were like this ugly woman that they were fucking,
Yeah. Yeah. That they kind of kept on the. Yeah.
like they don't really want people to know.
Yeah.
And Jello's take on it was, well, you guys were this experiment,
Right.
and and so when we did our third record, we recorded it. We had no intentions. We were going to shop it,
Yeah.
but we ran out of money. And the guy who was recording it basically was like, "I'm not doing any more work on this record."
Right.
And me and Ross, our bass player, like sat in his car, and I said, "Who is the richest person we know that likes our band?" And he said, "I fucking hate to say it, but it's probably Jello."
Right.
And sure enough, like we called Jello and he was like, "Oh, you're making a record? Well, why didn't you tell me? Let's get cracking on that." So we put
Yeah.
out the record with AT,
Yeah.
and it was a slightly better experience, but he was a little bit stuck. He has this very like old business model, like you get in the fucking van and you sell records door to
Right.
door,
Yeah.
and we weren't able to do that. And like
Right.
I had a kid, and everybody was in other bands and had
Yeah.
lives. We
Right.
just couldn't do it.
Yeah.
So
And then the fourth record, The Tenant, is that the fourth one?
yeah. And for that one, we just basically, like, again, recorded it ourselves. We had gotten we took some corporate money from Scion and we sold a track to Adult Swim.
Yeah.
So we had a little bit of money to fuck around with. So we just funded that record ourselves. And then Chris Bruni from Profound Lore, like he had been interested in us way back around our first record, but we said no because his label was kind of small and it had grown. And we
Yeah.
kind of back around and we were like, "Hey, do you want to put out this record we made?" And he fucking just straight up was like, "No."
Yeah. Hmm.
He was like, "You guys have been around a long time and no one really cares."
Right.
And I was like, "Fine." And then we were on tour and we played. He lives outside of Toronto. We played a show in Toronto and had a CDR of it.
Yeah.
And I gave it to him and was like, you just listen to it. I know you're not interested in putting it out. And he listened to it, and 45 minutes later, like the runtime of the record, he texted me and he was just like, I want to put out this record. So we
Nice.
said, do it,
Yeah.
you know? So, and that was it, and then it was, I feel like Chris had told me at one point that I'd played on more. I don't know if this is the case now, but I was like the musician that had played on the most releases on his label
Oh, wow.
because I think I was in like four bands that put out records on that
Yeah.
label.
Yeah. Yeah. Huh.
So,
Yeah. I just picked up the reissue of that.
yeah, which is, a long time coming because we there was a label in Europe in Spain called Throne that had pressed it to vinyl, like I don't know, I think back in like 2010 or 11,
Yeah.
and a bunch of them got destroyed
Yeah.
like in shipping. So it sort of became this like sought after. And then, then it was the first record we had ever made that got any kind of critical love.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So, and then we broke up.
Yeah.
So it was like this perfect storm of making that record like this obscure relic. And people had hit us up about reissuing it. And every time we would go to Chris, who owned the rights to it, we would say, hey, do you want to let someone's, and he would always say no,
Huh.
you know, but he wasn't keeping it in print,
Right.
And then I think finally, just after being asked so many times, he said, yeah, fuck it,
Yeah.
which,
It's done well.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
it's, I mean, he still has like the digital on his site and
Yeah.
whatnot. And, he can make those fucking CDs, write them, you
Yeah.
know.
I wasn't familiar with that one. I kind of, it's like casual with some of the older stuff. And you had reposted, uh, some guy had bought it and wrote this nice thing about it, how much the album meant to him. And I think I liked his post. And then he added me, and this just goes back to just like talking about music with random people. And we just started talking that night, and for like 3 or 4 hours, just I can't remember his name. He does
Jason,
merch for Necrot.
yeah, Jason.
Yeah, good
He's a
dude.
he's a great guy. He's
Yeah, yeah,
a
just
local
like
wild ass.
yeah. He was just wacky. He was just like I'm
Yeah,
like
yeah,
long messages back and forth, and I was like, oh, this is cool. Just going from talking about your band ended up on the Grateful Dead and his dad's bluegrass band, and it was cool.
yeah.
Good dude. And it's cool that just like a Ludicra record did that, and so it's good
Yeah,
stuff.
it's strange to me because when we did those like reunion shows a couple years back, like I really, 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 and I don't know, if that's just I don't spend a lot of time, I don't go out a whole lot,
Yeah,
but I had no idea that like in that what 15-year fucking period since we'd broken up that like, that many people had discovered it and heard about it. Decibel wanted to put it in their Hall of Fame. And I was like, that's probably should be reserved for records that sold more than 100 fucking copies.
right.
I just didn't really understand it. Like, I like it. It's
Yeah,
probably the Tenon is probably one of, I don't know how many fucking records I've played on, but it's like 50 something. And
yeah,
of the records, it's like the one that I can honestly say, like, oh yeah, that actually came out like better than we had hoped.
yeah.
Usually it's like, okay, it's good, but like I don't know, you're always a little bit hypercritical. And that was the only record where I listened to it. Once I could stop listening to it from the inside out and listen to it from the outside in, I was like, this is a fucking great record.
Yeah, yeah,
And, but to have other people, you know, say it, have it mean so much to them, that was really shocking
yeah,
to me. It still is like even the same with Hickey or anything that Ludicra did. I mean, I understand it with Agalloch because I was a fan of that band before I
yeah,
would play them, and I had that experience with
yeah.
them doing.
Right.
But from my things that were a little more personal in my own work, I've never, I could never imagine.
Yeah, yeah. And Ludicrous was a little more not as straight. It wasn't like straight ahead metal, and that's why I liked it. This kind of goes all over the place and some spacey stuff and some jazzy stuff. And you're a big jazz fan.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely, I don't know how much of that shows up there. It definitely showed up a lot with the band War Boris that I
Yeah,
put, because they were already doing this sort of thing that required me to like rethink how drums are played, like
yeah.
the way a trap kit works.
Hmm.
And I really like when I was listening, they had a record they did with a drummer before me, a great drummer. So he got to Justin Green. He kind of got to sort of invent like how drums would work in that band.
Yeah,
And I was like, okay, like, but it wasn't really jazz. It was like just this very light and spacious sort of playing. And then I kind of was listening and I went, I don't have a reference point. Like, I don't listen to a lot of music that is light and spacious like
yeah.
this, except for jazz.
Hmm.
And I started thinking about like, oh, like, the role of a kick drum as like not really a constant pulse or a timekeeper, but as like something that just lends weight to a certain note.
Right.
Or they started thinking a lot about the angle of how I'm hitting a hi-hat or using a hi-hat, opening and closing a hi-hat where a snare would be,
Yeah.
and that all came from listening to jazz. And
Right.
if I listened to jazz, I don't know that I could have, I was never learned how to play jazz. And then
Right.
but it was a really neat time where I got to like sit down and listen to jazz records and go, oh, I think I'm really listening, and this is how can this apply to this band?
Yeah.
But I never was able to fit it into other bands,
Yeah. Yeah. And how early did you get into jazz stuff?
I mean, I was kind of a little late to it. I think I started listening in like my mid 30s,
Yeah. Yeah. Same
which
here.
is about when people like I just had this period where I was like real, I just didn't want to hear music with guitars.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Really, distorted guitars I was a little fucking tired of. And I think I came by it through, I think it was like Hank Mobley's Soul Station,
Hmm.
and buying like a CD and always like loving the Blue Note
Yeah.
cover,
Yeah. Yeah.
and just even like before that had like I had a fucking coffee table book of like Francis Wolf's photography of the sessions.
Yeah.
Always loved like the pictures of the musicians and the way the sessions looked in those photographs, but hadn't heard a lot of the records, and think
Yeah.
on a just got a CD of that and was
Yeah.
like, this works now, much like Steely Dan.
Yeah.
Maybe it was listening to jazz that brought me to Steely Dan. I don't
Yeah.
know.
Yeah. And it's an easy music to just lose your fucking mind into, just get lost in, because you would get, a record, and then you'd say, look at the sidemen. You'd be like, who's this guy Wayne Shorter? And then you'd go
Right.
find his records, and then it's the sidemen on that, and it's just like this infinite just world of stuff. And you
Yeah, it
start
works
to,
very differently than
yeah,
other genres for that reason. Like, yeah, I started to figure out which players I liked, which years,
yeah,
which labels were putting out interesting records.
yeah,
In a way, it was a lot like punk in this thing where it was like I remember looking on the back of a punk record and going like, they thank this band,
yeah, the thank you list. Yeah,
and it was like, oh, here's this other thing, and it was like, I don't know, like fucking Joe Henderson is like
yeah, yeah,
obsessed with Joe Henderson. Like every fucking note that guy has played that I've heard, and there's so much I haven't heard, just goes right where I need it to fucking go.
yeah, yeah.
And it was like, okay, there was a record he made called Basra, and the leader on that is a drummer named Pete LaRocca.
Okay.
Pete LaRocca on drums, and it's piano, bass, and and Joe Henderson on fucking alto sax, and it's fucking dark, you
Yeah.
know.
Yeah.
Like I think I always thought jazz was going to be like, the theme from the Tonight Show.
Yeah. Like, hey, yeah.
Yeah,
But
and I just was wrong. There's a lot of really like heavy and dark. I mean, and even that too, like I was saying about Worm, it also caused me to like really rethink like what makes something heavy or
yeah.
what makes something dark. Because I think I spent so much time when I was younger thinking that dark, you know, and heavy hinges on fucking minor scales
Yeah.
and volume
Yeah.
and how fucking hard the drums are being hit or how fast it is,
Yeah. Yeah.
or slow. And it just had, and I just saw a lot of, I don't know, jazz kind of opened me up to this idea that like it has there's other ways of
Yeah. Yeah.
conveying, you know.
Especially when you read the stories about some of those guys and the lives they were living,
Yeah. Yeah.
Bud Powell and
That Powell story is brutal,
yeah. Yeah.
fucking Lee Morgan, who got shot in the
Yeah.
dick.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
yeah, I'm kind of still like on the hunt. There's a couple of, like, I don't know that anyone has written that book yet. There's a real good like Blue Note book that came out like 2 years ago,
Yeah.
but it's really, really just nuts and bolts about like the recording, and it's got a lot of like pictures of like, the original layouts and some of the
Yeah.
music and a lot of the photos, but it's not going into great detail about like the personal lives of the
Right.
characters. It very, very skims that. Like, I don't know that that book's been written yet.
Yeah. Sometimes those pictures though tell the story, just looking at
Yeah.
some of those photographs and you can feel the vibe in the studio of, this dude's going through some shit, you know.
And the craziest thing, I was talking to Tom, who's the owner of Econo Jam, the other day. We were talking about how like all those fucking records were made, like Rudy Van Gelder, the guy who
Yeah.
made, that was his parents' house.
Yeah, I know, right?
Parents had a house in New Jersey and just
Yeah.
they were like these old Dutch immigrants, and they let him set up the studio, and they just had like how much fucking weed and heroin was being in their fucking bathroom.
Yeah.
And then these incredible records that would be like, game changers and be beloved for fucking hundreds of years, I'm sure,
Yeah.
you'd made in their living room. And you could
Yeah.
see the picture, you see like a vase, in the
Right.
back with some shutters, and you're just like, that is some old people's house in suburban
Yeah.
New
I know.
York.
There's
And fuck, Eric Dolphy was there.
I know playing.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's nuts. There's a cool video from it's on YouTube. It's a Bill Evans performance. And it's the same thing. It's in someone's living room in like Sweden or something. I must have had like a day off from the tour. And same thing. It's like it's right around when he I think was starting to go downhill a little. 'Cause you can
Uh,
kind of see, you can just kind of tell it in his face. And I'll have to send you the link to that. It's
yeah,
really good.
thank you. Yeah,
Yeah.
I'm not super, super familiar with him. I know we have some records at the store, and I'm still like sifting through a lot of like things that I've never heard.
Yeah.
I was very like when I first got into jazz, I was very rigidly about Blue Notes from like 63 to like 67.
Right.
I kind of was
Specific.
like a sweet spot for me, like some Andrew Hill records and the
Yeah.
Herbie records from that time, and
Yeah.
certain Ron Carter and anything Anthony Williams,
Yeah.
like Joe Henderson, you know, there. But then I was like, okay, I opened up to a lot of other things, and
Yeah.
especially it's like, at the store, I can
Play it.
listen
Yeah.
up
Just get,
to, while I'm working, I'm listening to like 10 records
yeah.
over the course of a day. So,
Yeah. I worked at the label Rounder Records for a long time. And when I first started there, I worked in the warehouse in like the receiving department. And the guy that was sort of like the head of that department was this guy, Rocky Stone, it was a book written by a guy in Boston about record collectors. And he was in there because he had this amazing collection. But he got me into a ton of jazz, and he was this Vietnam veteran, and just like, just like when I went to his house one day, he had every inch of his house is CDs and records. And then there's an area of the porn. It was an area of like porn, but then just a mattress on the floor and a steel folding chair with two TVs on top of each other. And but he would come in and he would just be like, "Oh, I have this, 16 CD Teddy Wilson box set we're going to listen to today," and be like, "Okay." We do. He would always say a gentleman by the name of Billy Cobham or whoever it is.
Oh yeah, man. Well, thank God for those fucking people.
Yeah,
Like,
yeah. It's everyone needs one of those kind of guys in their life.
yeah, I've had several over the years. I mean, there was a guy like, this dude Jaffa that worked at the store. He recently left to go work for SF Jazz.
Yeah,
Uh, but he was like that guy, and he is like encyclopedic. Like, I mean, I remember I would just fucking shoot him a text now and again. They'd be like, yeah, so who plays fucking flute on fucking blah blah blah? And he'd be like,
right.
oh, it's Ronnie Laws.
Yeah,
He's like that guy,
yeah.
but
Two
never,
seconds later, replying.
yeah, never a dick about it. But like that dude, like in the short time I worked at the store, like we would, he knew that I had this, I mean, my interest in jazz and like old soul and funk and stuff like that compared to his is real marginal.
Yeah,
But it's like he doesn't know shit about metal or punk, right?
right. Yeah,
Well, like we would, but he was there was just so many. Every time I worked with him, I would be like, don't fucking talk to me about records because then I'm going to end up buying a bunch of records.
right.
It's like this. It's funny you mentioned Billy Cobham because that's like there was some Billy Cobham record, and he like held it up and he was like, "Do you know this record?" And I was like, "Well, I know Billy Cobham from Mahavishnu, you know."
Right.
He was like, "You play drums and you don't know this record?" And like we fucking put it on. It's like the most insanely great fucking record. And I listened to nothing but that record for like 2 weeks,
Yeah,
And I was like, I wish you didn't tell me about it.
yeah. The apartment building my dad lives in L.A. Uh, there was a guy that lived in the building, a drummer, Alphonse Mos
Move
Alphonse.
on.
Yeah, yeah. He lived in
Yeah.
his apartment,
Oh,
and
cool.
yeah, and I would be in like the laundry room, and my dad was good friends with him because my dad was in the music business, and but he introduced me to him, and he was like, "Yeah, look this guy up," and uh, yeah, he was just a cool guy. He died a few years ago, I guess,
Yeah, I'm
but
not super familiar. I know the name,
yeah, yeah,
but I don't know what it did.
yeah, I found a couple of his records, like sort of fusiony stuff from cheap records you can find, but
Yeah, I mean that's kind of shit I thought that I mean I definitely I don't know. I remember like the first time I ever saw Black Flag play in 1984, they came through
yeah,
and they were playing at this hall in Fort Lauderdale, and I offered to help the promoter like set up, mainly because I didn't want to pay to get into the show and I wanted to fucking meet Black Flag.
yeah,
And we saw pictures of them. They didn't have pictures on their record, so I didn't know
yeah.
what it looked like. And I rode my bike to the venue, and there were these like hippies sitting in the parking lot, and they were fucking listening to Mahavishnu Orchestra. And I walked in and asked the promoter, I was like, is Black Flag here? And she was like, oh, that's them outside. And I was, oh, and I went outside and fucking chatted them up. And I was like, what the fuck are you guys listening to?
Right.
Mahavishnu Orchestra. And I was like, this is some of the fucking worst music I've ever heard,
Yeah. Right. Right.
Now like Birds of Fire is one of my favorite records.
Yeah.
So
I know.
how
Right.
does, how does that happen? I don't
Yeah.
know.
I know. I saw Black Flag around the same time for the first time, '84, and that's when they were doing the, open with the process of weeding out or
Yeah.
one of those instrumentals, and at the time, and also the open, at the time. St. Vitus played, and that wasn't my, even though I was a metal kid, it just wasn't I didn't get it at 14, and I
Mhm.
didn't get Tom Tricoli's dog played with them, and but then I hear all this stuff years later, and I'm like, especially like the side two of Family Man or Process of Weeding Out. I love that record.
I do too. No, I do. And, I guess I kind of also like when those records came out, I was like, oh, this is cool. I liked it, but but it was because it was Black Flag. I didn't
Yeah,
make
yeah,
connection to Mahavishnu Orchestra. So
yeah,
wait, and but I also loved that Black Flag were just trolling their
yeah.
audience.
Oh, I know. Same.
It was all in keeping with
Mhm.
that just thing that I always sort of fucked with was like, you know, going back to the great fucking Malcolm Tent, like being the nonconformist in the nonconformist scene.
Yeah,
And it was clear that Black Flag could do whatever they wanted.
yeah,
And plus it was just such a vibe, like aesthetically, the visuals with
yeah.
Penny
Right.
just was such a solid fucking package. But
Yeah.
I saw them, they were with DC3 and Twisted Roots.
Oh, wow.
And I still haven't come around on Twisted Roots,
No, I haven't. Yeah, I haven't either.
but DC3 was cool,
Yeah, yeah. Worm. I liked Worm. I never saw them, but
Yeah,
I like their
I
records.
saw Saccharine Trust
Oh,
around
nice.
the time they came through and played in Miami.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like I was obsessed with anything SST.
Oh, yeah. The
Like,
blasting concept was when that came out, and then I discovered they had all the because I think the first Black Flag thing I bought was the 6 pack 7 inch. There was a record store called Popcorn Records, which was kind of like I think there was a few of them in Massachusetts, and they had a very small section but I found Dead Kennedy's Life Sentence 12 inch and Black Flag 6 pack 7 inch, and those are the first things I bought from them. And yeah,
yeah, I was telling a friend of mine, like, so like when I first started buying punk records, like there were big chain stores, like,
yeah,
in the South we had Peaches, and I think we had like
oh yeah,
Warehouse.
Peaches, yeah, Warehouse,
But like you'd go and they would have, I think it was Warehouse. There was one in a mall in Miami, and they just had this section that was called imports,
yeah, yeah, imports,
right?
yeah,
And punk records just ended up in the import section,
yeah,
So you would like look and you would, and there was also another like chain store had a section that was punk and new wave,
oh yeah,
like a lot of times these things were filed together. So I had, there was a lot of records that I bought erroneously, like thinking hardcore. This is going to be hardcore, or
yeah,
this
yeah, yeah,
punk was, an import or a new wave record, Like I
yeah,
discovered the Smiths that way. Like I bought the first Smiths album because it has this like black and white cover of a shirtless dude. Like I thought that shit was gonna
yeah,
go hard, And like and I bought it and I brought it home and like my first listen, I fucking hated it.
yeah,
And I had 8 records at the time.
yeah,
It got a rotation and I came to fucking love it.
yeah. Hatful of
And,
Hollow.
and then I was defending the Smiths to punker kid. Yeah.
Think of how many disappointed kids came home with Molly Hatchet albums through the years. Thinking it was
Or the
crazy.
big one would have been Meatloaf's Bad Out of Hell,
Yeah, yeah,
right? What a
yeah,
deceptive. That record's gonna fucking tear ass.
yeah,
Again, fucking Molly Hatchet flirting with disaster.
yeah,
I mean, they were from Florida, so I
yeah,
have an affinity for them, but
yeah,
I fucked with that record.
yeah, yeah, yeah. I liked their cover of Dreams, which I never realized was at the time. I didn't realize it was a Allman Brothers song,
Well,
but I always liked their version of that.
they were like, well, you had Leonard Skinner were like really wanting, were really heavily wanting to be the Allman Brothers.
Yeah, yeah,
Hatchet who really wanted to be Skinnered.
yeah,
So it makes sense. But
yeah,
you would talk about a depressing story. I fell down a rabbit hole of just reading about Molly Hatchet on the internet and the
yeah,
various. And there's a lot of death and a lot of real sad. And like their singer who was like Native American, like he fucking died like penniless in like very near where I grew up.
yeah.
Like went back to his mom's house.
Oh wow.
And it was just like, yeah, I was like, oh, I wonder what that guy did after Molly had. She was like, no, he fucking died.
Yeah,
Or I wonder what that guy did after Molly had. She,
yeah,
no, he's dead too.
yeah,
Just lots of just real fucking
Yeah,
depressing
yeah.
with the
The town I grew up in, well, or lived in as a teenager, Swampscott, was where David Lee Roth lived briefly, but also Fran Shan and Sib from Boston lived there as well. And in the summers, they would have for the like the or for Fourth of July, they would always have these like fireworks things, but then they would have like a live concert and they would have these jam sessions, and those two guys would always be there, and there'd be the guy from like the fucking Joe Perry Project or something like that doing Mustang Sally and
yeah.
shit like that. But Al Quint from Suburban Voice, who was a dear friend of mine, opened a record store with Sib Hashin, the drummer at one point
That
in
oh
the
shit. Yeah,
in the
because
90s, and they didn't. He's Al tells the story often that they just did not. They had a because he was Sib was friends with his family, and they had a huge falling out over going into business. And I think it's because Al was just ordering so many punk and hardcore albums, and he just was like, "Why are you ordering this stuff?" And Al was trying to build up this store to have like a good store in that area of the suburbs, and I don't think he was having it. So
yeah, that's yeah, the most I think the most famous person like musician that lived in my hometown was Pat fucking Travers.
oh, snorting whiskey.
Yeah, and like I grew up with a fucking hatred
Yeah, yeah,
at fucking Travers, and
yeah.
I
It's
have
that loud blues. Just
yeah,
yeah,
it's just
yeah.
like that fucking scene in Ghost World, like Blue,
Yeah, yeah,
like
Blues Hammer. I'm digging the
Pat
deal. Was you? Yeah, fucking yeah,
But I have this story where there was a matinee show and it was Circle Jerks and 7 Seconds. We're playing this matinee at this shitty bar on the beach, like some total like spring break, like frat dude party bar.
yeah,
It was a matinee, and after the show, me and Maddie, who was the guitar player of Hickey, we were just, bugging the Circle Jerks as they were loading out. And we were
yeah,
like, we would always like, try to get bands to like go eat food with us or like,
yeah.
and we were like, oh, what are you guys doing now? And they were like, well, we're going to stick around because the show here tonight is Pat Travers. And we were like, Pat Travers fucking sucks.
Right,
And it was like, that was again like the Black Flag Mahavishnu thing. It was like
right,
these older punker dudes that we idolized and they listen to like this shit that we thought, we just,
right,
we're like, they're not, but it makes sense, right? Because
right.
they were like older
Older
dudes
dudes. Yeah.
and they were nostalgic for this shit. And they were super excited that Pat Travers was.
Oof.
And I remember like Greg Hetson was like, it's almost like we're opening for Pat Travers. And I was like, that's a fucking nightmare.
Yeah, that sounds terrible.
But we decided to stick around because, all right, fuck it. We'll see Pat Travers,
Yeah.
like Circle Jerks and see Pat Travers. And, it was everything that, like, it confirmed my hatred for him,
Oof. Yeah.
and
Yeah.
it was just, yeah, the boom, boom, out goes the lights and
Yeah. Yeah.
terrible, like, crowd participation. And there's not, like, there was more people there to see the Circle Jerks,
Yeah.
7 Seconds, than were there to see Pat Travers. And after the show, we're back out in that alley behind the place and we're saying bye to the Circle Jerks. And Pat Travers like comes out, he's yelling at his band, and he's
Yeah.
like he fires like their drummer.
Oh Jesus.
He's like, you can't speed up after all the fucking fills, you're fired. He like gets into like a Toyota Celica with like a fucking vanity plate that says like fucking guitar man,
Right. Yeah.
or some shit. And like we were like, we felt like we'd won. We were like, there's your pass.
Tennessee. Yeah. Exactly. That's
And
awesome.
they were like, oh, that was the greatest thing. Seeing we got to see Pat Travers in his fucking garbage hometown. Jimmy Buffett was also from
Ooh.
there or had lived there later
Yeah.
on.
Eek.
So
Yeah.
this this was what we had to be proud of.
I think Tommy Aldridge played with Pat Travers, which was he should be.
I think he did. Yeah,
Yeah.
Black Oak, Arkansas, and
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't, he definitely was not Tommy Aldridge because
No, no.
he would
Yeah,
have
I
been
don't think.
a snake at that point.
Yeah, yeah, that's true.
He, he was playing, he was not playing Summers on the Beach. Uh,
Um, here's a newer band that you had that I discovered a while back, and I fucking absolutely love it. Is Lethal Limits, which is
oh,
like
yeah.
what is so this guy Jeff Corso is
Yeah.
the is and it's like the Wipers who's it's like I was like how come more people need to know about this. It's just this catchy. I mean there's one record on Spotify, but I think there's a couple on Bandcamp.
Yeah. He's got like, he's somebody I met recently. He's like quite a bit younger than me. And he was in a bunch of like, like, I think he was like, he's 10 years younger than me. No, like 15 years younger than me.
Yeah,
He was in a lot of like really good like hardcore bands that were kind of like, that there's some overlap with Ludicra.
yeah,
So
okay,
I never saw, but I fucking met him
yeah.
fairly recently, like 7, 8 years ago, and he had like a hickey, he has a hickey tattoo.
Oh wow,
We ended up chatting and he was like, "Oh, I have this project I'm doing. It's these songs I wrote, and he was like typing the drums, like you
yeah,
can type, and he gave me this demo he made and asked like for my honest critique of it, and I was like fucking floored by how good the songs
yeah.
were.
It's like well written.
Yeah, like
Melody,
really
the melodies are just like I'm like,
just
where's this
hooks,
coming from? Yeah, yeah,
like memorable, just really good, memorable, beautiful, melodic information.
yeah,
And he was typing the drums, and I was like, man, these drums suck. And like,
yeah,
and I was like, if you can, if you will track to a click track, I can record drums for your stuff.
yeah.
So like during the pandemic, we like made that record. We made like a EP where we did like a Credence cover and a go-go song
Oh
and
wow,
just as sort of a test run, and then
yeah,
we made that full length,
yeah,
you know, and played a couple shows. Like I'm kind of not fully uh like there's been some sort of I don't want to say like disagreement, but it's like, he has different goals as
right,
like
yeah,
play shows, and I just don't really want to play shows.
yeah,
I'm interested in making records and helping him here and there
yeah,
with it. It's like his baby.
yeah,
And like if he wants it to be like a full band that plays shows, he's gonna have to find people to fucking do it, you
yeah,
know.
yeah. I like
But
that. I've been playing bass with a guy that where it's his deal. So I just like going over there and doing that, and he does all the other shit. And I like that. It takes a lot off. I don't have to
yeah,
think that much.
that's kind of how I want it to be. I don't want to put, I'm just it's like, if you want to have a band and like play shows and go on tour and then there's like all these things that come with that, like getting a practice space and carving
Yeah,
out so once or twice a week and
yeah,
owning gear and owning a vehicle and then getting who's going to book the shows. There's all these things that
yeah,
go with it that
yeah,
I'm not all that interested in fucking doing.
yeah,
So it's like we've had some conversations. He's got a lot of material written, and I've been like chipping away at it.
yeah.
And there's like, I think, I don't know, there's like a 4-song EP that's coming out
Hmm,
soonish, you know,
nice.
it's just as good as
Yeah,
anything. But yeah, that was like a pandemic project. Like
yeah.
neither of us had jobs. He's also like a full-time student at UC Berkeley now.
Oh,
You
okay.
So he's an interesting dude. He was like, homeless, fucking gnarly, like alcoholic, and
Oh,
fucking
wow.
literally died and was like fucking legally dead for 10 minutes and in a coma for 2 weeks, and then came out of it and got his shit together. And he's just one of the most like naturally gifted songwriter, guitar players I've ever met.
Nice. That's
So
awesome. Nice.
and just like, like I love that he doesn't know shit about recording. He doesn't have a super wide like it's been really exciting because it's like, he's young. He's like
Yeah,
30,
yeah.
but he'll like call, like he just discovered fucking Boston. Well,
Yeah.
recently, and he's obsessed. He's obsessed with fucking Tom Scholes.
Yeah.
You know they recorded that record like in the fucking parents' garage. I'm like, yes. And he's like, he just discovered like he's fucking just discovered Steely Dan and like
Yeah.
you and like so it's really, it's real fucking cool. Like his
It
favorite
is. Yeah.
are like favorite bands are like Oasis and like Negative Approach.
That's awesome.
So
Nice.
he's like now discovering all this cool shit. I just turned him on to like Cheap Trick.
Yeah.
And he's like, what? So,
That's great. I love when you can turn, people onto something and it actually clicks with them because especially and it's usually newer people because like, like two of my best buddies like I send them shit all the time, music or and then a week later I'm like, did you listen? No, I didn't listen to it. You're like, come on, dude.
I've got like a handful
I
of,
know you like this, like
yeah, I get that all the time. And I'm just like, there's about six people out there that I will like, be like, okay, like they're saying to listen to this. Like,
yeah,
I'm fucking definitely
yeah,
a fucking time.
yeah,
It's like, I'm always confused because I mean, it's like there's that thing that people do on social media where it's like the top 10 list at the end of the year.
yeah.
And I'm always like, people are like, they're getting overboard with it. They're like, oh man, here's my top 1 million fucking records of the year. And I'm like, you did not hear 1 million.
Yeah, no, I know.
It's like usually like
Yeah,
50. I'm like, there
yeah,
were not 50. And
yeah,
for me, the criterion is there's like, I'll hear 50 records. I'm like, yeah, that's cool. That's
yeah,
good.
yeah, yeah.
But there's only going to be two or three at best, like
That are a
records.
top record. Yeah,
Well, then I'm like, I'm going to listen to this in 10 years. Like, I
yeah,
will
yeah,
10 years. And there's records that I fawned over in 2017, and I'll like fucking go back and I'll be like, oh, I've totally forgot that fucking record even
yeah.
did.
I know.
Like maybe one record that comes out a year where I'm like, this is something I know that I'm
Yeah,
gonna, this is like a fucking, you know, like the records I listened to from the 80s that I still love, like
yeah,
Commercial Break, Don't Break the Oath still works every time.
yeah, yeah.
It's like, that's not happening. Like there's not
No, I
50 of
know.
those. There's not 50 Break the Oath coming out every year.
No,
There's
imagine.
one or two, so it's like whenever people, and I always post something at the end of the year, like, here's the three records I really, really love.
Yeah, yeah.
And then I have all these people that are like, whoa, you haven't heard the Gerfnagar
Yeah, you're
fucking
like,
10-inch that
I
there was
can't
only,
believe you didn't mention. Yeah,
yeah, or like, or some shit that like, I could give a fuck about like
right. Yeah,
a fucking gate creeper or some fucking like Fisher Price fucking
yeah,
like old school death metal shit that like I like bitch I have Entombed records. Like
yeah. I know. At this point, I don't need.
I don't need this. Like
Yeah,
it's fine. Like it's okay. I'm glad you're enjoying it, but
yeah.
like, I'm like your fucking standards are low. There's my
Exactly.
record store snob coming. I could only
There you go.
in it for so long.
90 minutes in, man.
90 minutes I was able to.
Well, on that note, maybe we should end it there.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. I appreciate you doing this, man. This was a lot of fun.
Yeah,
Uh,
thanks so much for
I,
having me.
I've enjoyed, you've definitely got me into a lot of good music, just stuff that you've posted, and so it's good, and it's good to hear that you actually enjoy doing that, in person at the store, and so
Oh yeah. Yeah.
it's
I
always
don't
good.
know
I'm
why.
like-minded people that just listen to everything and don't have guilty pleasures, aside from guilty
No,
races.
don't. I guess, yeah, don't feel guilty for liking something. That's fucking weird. There's like
Yeah,
there's so few things that bring actual joy in the world. Like, don't let anybody make you feel shitty for liking something.
yeah, yeah. That's my least favorite. I had a friend when I first started doing this podcast say he wanted to come on, and he said, "Let's, we should do this episode. We just talk shit about a bunch of bands." And I'm like, yeah, I don't really want to. I'd rather let's talk about how what good stuff, you know. I mean, there's a time and a place to talk shit about stuff, which is fun,
Yeah.
but I'd rather spend time, you know, spreading good music to people that haven't heard it and that kind of thing,
Yeah,
you
I mean,
know.
I'm down to talk some shit, but it's also
Yeah,
like
yeah,
it's easier to talk about things you don't like than things you do like.
yeah,
So,
yeah.
I'm trying as I get older to like be a little more diplomatic and understand that I'm not the fucking center of the universe. Like there's a lot of music that's not for me. It's not
Yeah,
made.
yeah.
And I've I've been very lucky that I've had a long, that I grew up in this time where it was like I wasn't inundated with tons and tons of shit, you
I know.
know.
Yeah.
So there it is.
Yeah. Awesome, man. Yeah, you have a good night, man. And I
All
will
right, you too.
talk to you soon.
All right, yeah, send me that Bill Evans
I
thing.
will. I'll definitely.
All right, thank you.
All right. Cheers.